when you met with the police out in that area, were you asked to identify a bra that day?
No, not that I recall.
Okay. All right, I just have one further question. I'm sorry, one last topic. Do you have any personal knowledge of MJ being friends with Dr. Demirov?
No.
Okay, I'd like to address your testimony regarding when you lived with Stephen and Charlie. Would it be accurate to say that when Stephen and Charlie got together, Stephen was about 17?
That I actually don't know.
Do you happen to know how much older Charlie is over Stephen?
I think it's 3 years. I don't know for sure, actually.
I think you testified that when at some point you were living at the Door of Faith Road with your family?
Yes.
And that at that point, were all of you living together? You and your sisters?
At that point, it would have just been me, Fiona, Brooke, my mom, and Johnny.
Okay, I thought you had testified that when you were at the Door of Faith Road, Fiona wasn't living there.
No, Fiona was.
Okay. And then at some point, you folks moved to the back house over at the Haiku property?
Yeah, we did.
And would it be fair to say that when you folks moved into that Haiku property, a total of 6 people would have been living there? Would have been you, Johnny, Kimberly and Fiona, Brooke, and Charlie?
Yes.
And about what year was that?
That was 2000. I think it was 2011.
Can I ask, were you paying rent?
No.
Because at some point, you, Charlie, and Fiona were no longer there, right?
I was still technically there. That was where.
Okay, this is when you're 50% of your time there, 50% of your time at Charlie's and Stephen's?
At the Haiku house, Charlie and Stephen were not together at that point.
Okay.
But I was still going over to Charlie's.
Okay. At some point, Charlie and Stephen get a place together, and that's when you spend 50% of the time there and 50% of the time at the Haiku house?
They had already gotten the place when I moved onto Island, and then that's when I started going over there.
Okay. And that was about the same time that Fiona was spending time at Charlie's and Stephen's?
Yes.
To your knowledge, was Fiona paying rent?
No, she wasn't.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that at some point then, your mother's household started off with 6 people, but at some point there, much of that shifted over to Charlie's and Stephen's residence, including you and Fiona part-time?
I do object as a vague which residence at this point.
The objection is sustained.
Are you confused about what I'm asking about?
Kind of. I think the houses are getting confused.
Okay, so at some point, whereas it started off as all 6 of you in the Haiku house, at some point Charlie moves in with Stephen, right?
No, she was not with him at that point.
Is it like after that, at some point that they're together, or before that?
It was before that, before me and Fiona had even gotten on island, they were already together and in the Kula house.
Okay. So it's at that point then that you and Fiona are spending time there rather than at
The
full time
Dorfman.
at your mother's house, right?
Yes.
And when was that?
That was when I was in 8th grade. I'm not too sure on the year.
Okay. And Fiona was about how old?
She would have been in her junior year.
Okay. Let me ask you this. When you were spending time at Charlie's and Stevens, were you paying rent?
No,
To your knowledge, was Fiona?
no.
Let me ask you this. During that period when you were spending time at Steven and Charlie's, was Charlie your legal guardian?
She wasn't my legal guardian, no.
Was Steven your legal guardian?
No.
You'd agree with me that Steven was what, about 19 or 20 then? Even that?
I'm not too sure on his age at that point.
Now, you agree with me, are you one of those who believe that Steven was using Charlie during the time period that you lived with them?
When I was living with them, no.
So your testimony would be that you're not of the opinion that Steven was using Charlie then?
No, back then I was definitely in an innocent age of thinking that everything was just all happy-go-lucky and love.
Was it your testimony that by 2013, Carly and Steven were no longer a couple?
Yes, by 2013 they weren't together.
I'm sorry?
They weren't together by 2013.
And when you say by 2013, that would be by January of 2013?
Yes.
Were they still living together?
No, they were not living together.
If they were broken up by 2013, were they broken up before then, to your knowledge?
Yes.
Okay. To your personal knowledge, when had they broken up?
I believe it was either 2011. I'm not too positive though.
Would it be while they were still living together?
Yes, they decided to break up while they were still in that Kula house together.
And that was common knowledge, that even though they were living together, they were no longer together as a couple.
Objection, lack of foundation, Your Honor.
The objection is sustained.
That was knowledge to you at least, that even though they were living in the same house, they were no longer a dating couple, right?
Again, lack of foundation, Your Honor.
She was
The
living
objection
with
is overruled.
I'm not too sure if they were still living together. I know that she had moved to the mainland after they broke up.
Now, would it be fair to say that during that 50% of time that you were staying over at their house, that Stephen in no way forced you to be there?
No. He never forced me to be there.
That it was all your choice
Yes.
to live away from your mother half the time as a 13-year-old?
This objection is a form of question, it's argumentative.
The objection is sustained.
On a couch in his place, right? It was all your choice, right?
Yes.
As a 13-year-old.
Judge, objection, this is argumentative.
The objection is sustained.
Let me ask you this. At any time during that time period, did you ever thank Stephen for allowing you to live in his place?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation whether it's his place.
The objection is sustained.
No, I think there's been ample testimony that it was Stephen and Charlie's cooler place that she stayed 50% of the time at.
The testimony is he lives
The objection
there.
is to characterizing it as Stephen's place.
Thank you.
Would you call it Stephen's place?
From what I recall, it was in Charlie's name, so I always assumed just Charlie's place.
So to your knowledge then, Stephen was just there as a guest of Charlie?
Judge, objection, this calls for speculation.
This is just clarifying her answer, Judge.
It's called asking her to speculate.
It's clarifying her last answer.
You'll need to go about it a different way. I'm not saying you can't pursue that, but,
I'll just move on, thank you.
all right.
So when you testified in direct that there was no physical affection between Stephen and Charlie towards the end of their time together when they were living together, you'd agree with me that that would be because they were no longer romantically dating?
Judge, objection that misstates the testimony, the phrases that counsel added to that. And it calls for speculation.
What phrase? I'm
The court will overrule the objection. You may answer the question.
Sorry, would you repeat it?
So when you testified in direct that there was no physical affection that you observed between Stephen and Charlie towards the end of the time that you were living together with them, that would be because they were no longer romantically dating by that time, right?
Two objections, Your Honor. One, it does misstate the evidence. It wasn't at the end of the time she was there. Two, it calls for speculation because there's a
The
reason.
objection is sustained.
Thank you.
Did you testify in direct that at some point you observed no physical affection between Stephen and Charlie in the house that you spent 50% of the time in?
Yes.
When would that be relevant to? What time period?
While I was in 8th grade, I'm still not too sure on the year.
Would it be towards the end of your time living there or the beginning of your time living there?
It was kind of throughout my time living there.
Okay, so your testimony would be more accurate than that the whole time you were living there, it was your observation that they were not romantically dating.
From what I...
Judge, again, objection that does misstate.
The objection is overruled. You may answer the question.
From what I witnessed, they weren't. Yeah.
From what time period while you were living there? Was it from the whole time that you were there?
Oh, yes.
Now, if there is evidence that Charlie was paying all the rent then, you would testify that it would be appropriate because she had 2 siblings that were living in that place as well, right?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation. So
The objection is sustained.
Thank you.
If you spent 50% of your time over at Charlie's and Stevens, can you estimate about how much of Fiona's time was spent there?
Objection, Your Honor, it calls for speculation.
The objection is sustained.
To your knowledge, were you there more than Fiona, or was Fiona there more than you?
I was there more than Fiona.
At some point, when they were no longer living in the Kula house, do you know where Charlie moved to?
I actually don't recall.
Do you recall whether she moved to Kihei for a while?
I know that she did at one point stay with a friend in Kihei, but I'm not too sure on the timeline.
Well, I mean, would it be fair to say that you spent time with your sister Charlie between the time that Stephen and her moved out from each other and up to this incident where she went missing?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that one?
Would it be fair to say that after she moved out of the house with Stephen, that you continued to spend time with Charlie on a regular basis?
Yes, I did.
I mean, when I say a regular basis, you saw her how often?
Usually she would be the one picking me up from school, or we would end up having an adventure after school or something.
Okay. And this went on all the way to the time period when she went missing. Would that be accurate?
Yes, I know at one point she was on the mainland for quite a while though.
Aside from the time when she was on the mainland, during the time period we're talking about, would it be fair to say that you saw her at least every week?
Yes.
More than once a week?
Yes.
More than twice a week?
Yes.
More than 3 times a week?
Yes.
More than 4 times a week?
Yes.
More than 5 times a week?
Usually, yeah, every day,
Okay.
if not every other day.
Now, is it your testimony that you don't know whether she lived in Kihei then, after moving out of that Kula property?
I can't fully remember the timeline, but I believe after leaving the Kula house is when she went to the mainland.
Okay, when she came back from the mainland, where did she live?
I believe that's when she lived with us in Haiku,
Okay, and then where did she live?
and then I believe that's when she started staying with someone in Kihei, and then on occasion staying in Makwao.
Okay, and how long did she stay with somebody in Kihei?
I think that was a few months.
I mean, you'd agree with me that when you stay with somebody for a few months, you're living there, right?
Objection, Your Honor, this calls for speculation, it's an opinion.
The objection is sustained. We'll
Thank
take a
you.
recess.